Ghostbusters Afterlife is very nearly a perfect film. Yes, I finally got around to Ghostbusters Afterlife, having heard good things about it ever since it came out. Now, I want to preface what I just began with. I'm not like somebody that knows all of every bit of dialogue from the Ghostbusters movies. It's not like it was Star Trek or Star Wars for me, Ghostbusters. I saw the first film like 2 or 3 times over the years. I know I saw the sequel at some point. I did not waste time on 2016. So it's not like I'm the world's biggest super fan. I'm not pretending. I don't work for Amazon. I'm not faking it and pretending that it's everything in my life. The reason I say it's a perfect film, though, is because it delivers on all those things you look for in a quality film. Now, I recently just reviewed Spider-Man No Way Home, which I heard so many fabulous things about, and it had some fabulous moments in it, but it also had some really weird, inconsistent vibes and things. Ghostbusters Afterlife really does an amazing job of following up Ghostbusters, and it does it even though it's not really about the original characters. It is meant to introduce all new characters. It's meant to really, if you wanted to, you could go forward from here with the 4 kids and the mom and Paul Rudd, her boyfriend, living on that farm. And I would probably watch it. Not like I'm all psyched for the younger version, but they were good, especially Egon's granddaughter, especially Phoebe. So the movie is taking an old franchise, using some nostalgia bait, and bringing in a whole new generation. But it's actually done well, which is something that the Marxist reboots are completely failing to do. They usually do not. But by contrast, 2016 Ghostbusters, I didn't even bother seeing it. I've seen clips, though, within commentary. When you unceremoniously kill a former Ghostbuster and some snotty brat says, well, they weren't really Ghostbusters material. Let's go talk about men and feminism. It's dumb. It's dumb. So what you had in Ghostbusters Afterlife is a perfect bridge that skips a whole generation because Egon's daughter grows up without Egon. It's clearly focused on the kids. And so it skips a whole generation, but it brings the story from the 80s into the present. And again, it does everything that you would think would be woke, but it does it in a way that's completely not Marxist. Nobody whines and complains about Marxism. Well, we have one black female character that makes a comment that Gozer was really woke, which is interesting. It's the only time the comment's dropped, and it's about a 3,000-year-old demonic satanic figure, but I digress. But so we get passing the torch from Egon to his granddaughter, and she's so brilliant and she's so all of this, but they make it believable. We see her do believably nerd things and speak believably as a nerd. And I tell you, the amazing acting McKenna Grace pulls off for her age, the funny nerd jokes trying to be funny, the completely forced wink is just hilarious. It works to have Egon pass it to his granddaughter, who's an empowered, brilliant girl, because she's really brilliant. And you spend time in the movie establishing that she's brilliant. And you give us real human character development, finding out why he was absent from their lives and the horrible emotional baggage of that is not only shown realistically, it's acted so well by all the actors involved. It makes it completely believable and heart-wrenching. Again, I don't know all the words of dialogue to those movies. It's not like I was the biggest fan in the world. But any movie out of the blue, if you can do that well, you get those tear-jerking moments. And boy, it does an amazing job, Ghostbusters Afterlife, of tying in this generation, giving us these new characters, giving us all of the history, and in a way that you feel it. You feel Egon's absence. You feel what has happened and the years that have gone by. You get all the wonderful nostalgia of finding the old equipment, finding the old car, the Ecto-1, and it has all that callback, but it calls it back with respect. It's not to cheapen it. And it does feed into something new. I would fully expect that in a sequel, that a couple years later, Phoebe's a little bit older, they've got a new car, maybe it's a van, more in that, something with new equipment, maybe they find a wealthy donor that backs the project. They could completely update it from here and it would be fine, because they gave us the connection and the bridge of the old stuff respectfully and properly bringing it around. I've heard some people didn't like how little the real Ghostbusters were in it, like all together at the very end. But really, if you're rebooting this to a younger generation, you wanted to make sure the movie wasn't all about those older characters. And if you're going to spend time giving us real character development for the new characters, the real payoff is when the older characters finally come back, the two teams are sort of the new one just forming and the old one kind of merge, that working together at the end. This is how you do this properly. If you had Bill Murray and the others in there for the whole film too much, it would have detracted from the characters you were trying to sell to the audience now. And when you're doing it that well, you don't need to throw those guys in there to try to fill in any blanks. There's a couple places in the narrative where the kids seem to, they're too good at using the equipment, or it comes too easily, but it's not noticeable. I mean, it's not like Rey Palpatine suddenly is able to be 5 Luke Skywalkers. It's nothing that weird. It's just sort of it's obviously you don't want to do an extra 15 minutes of how they learn to use the equipment. So you give us a little bit of insight. You've established that they're really smart, and then they use it. So that kind of comes across in a few places as, but it doesn't cross over into full-on Mary Sueism. I did sort of feel bad having, adding one black female, and then she's the one that gets to say the only woke comment about the 3,000-year-old demon. And she seems to just be cool and good at everything for no reason. Weirdly enough, it's kind of almost an homage to Ernie Hudson. And I say that because in the original Ghostbusters, he kind of felt like the add-on. Because you got these 3 nerds, each in their own relatively different but connected fields. They're doing all this Ghostbuster stuff, and then they need someone else, and they end up getting Winston Zeddemore, and he's got a few lines. But Ernie Hudson, who amazing actor, and I loved him in Congo, one of my favorite movies ever. He had action hero potential. But he gets underutilized in the first Ghostbusters. Now we get this whole reboot, and we get a single black female in the group who was also sort of underutilized and not developed and just thrown in there. That almost felt like you hear about the studios having these little box checking things where they have to meet certain criteria, etc. Like, how many does she fill? She makes a woke comment. She's a black female. She's empowered. She don't need nobody. They don't really teach her anything. She's just good at everything. Like, it's almost like they added her like they did Winston. Like, he was an addition to the group to give you the whole 4 Musketeers, and you just had to add this girl in this one. That felt a little bit forced, but nothing about it detracts from anything. At no time are you like, here's Rey Palpatine, good at everything again. It's just sort of like she's there. She's just sort of there. I think if excuse me, if there were one criticism I were going to levy against this film, Ghostbusters Afterlife, it would be, it's a hard sell that Egon figured this whole thing out, and I'm not going to go into detail because you should watch the movie if you haven't, that nobody believed him. After fighting Gozer in New York, after all the things they went through together, that none of the other 3 Ghostbusters believed Egon, that he had to go off alone, that his life ended up completely messed up and nobody was there for him. Yeah, it's very emotional that they bring in, he's deceased, they bring the actor in and they put the Harold Ramis. They put him in, and they do a brilliant job of that, giving images of him without him speaking so that it doesn't, they're not using an AI. That would be kind of weird to try to make believe he's there. they bring in his ghost, and it's cool. And probably because he was gone in real life, they had to figure out this sort of contrivance for the story. But even though they all reconcile at the end, it leaves it kind of, there's a bad taste in your mouth of, I don't believe, based on the first two films, that he couldn't convince anyone of what was going on, that he had to do this alone and lose the rest of his life essentially alone, and for their safety, staying away from his own family. And that was a hard sell, to think that Venkman and the others, that they would abandon him like that after what they went through years ago. And so again, I understand it was a useful contrivance, especially when he's the one that's passed on and can't be there. How do we fit this into the story? But that part didn't feel right. Nevertheless, everything else about this movie, from the opening to the ending, the little clues that you do pan out, the little indicators they give you of what's coming, and it comes, and the callbacks then later, all of this is done so well that it ends up being, a perfectly executed film. It is very nearly perfectly executed. It does what it needs to do, and it leaves you, I would watch another one, although I don't think you need one. I think what this really did was give closure to that Ghostbusters. But if you wanted, you could do one, and you gave us enough with at least a couple of those characters, especially with Phoebe as the standout. You could do another Ghostbusters and do this for another generation. And it would work because you did it well, unlike all the recycled nonsense we're seeing with Lord of the Rings, the Rings of Sewer, and Quantum Leap backwards, and all of this ridiculous stuff they're doing now. They don't know how to connect it and pay tribute to and properly, respectfully go forward from there and keep the quality, because they don't know how to do quality stuff. They did it with Ghostbusters Afterlife, but you got Reitman in there, you got the others. It comes together just beautifully.